Hi, this is Module 6, Acquisitions and Budgeting. We've been talking a lot about the selection process, and tonight we're going to talk about actually acquiring the materials and budgeting for that acquisition. So my agenda for today is to review selection models for different library types. In other words, how does selection get done? Talk about acquisitions, talk about the new field of open electronic resources, and then talk about budgeting. There are a lot of slides, so I'm going to minimize my narration as much as possible. So I won't read the slides, I'll just point out the most important things. So this was a provocative statement that Evans and Saponaro made about college libraries serving a homogeneous user group. Um, from your experience with colleges, do you think that's true today? I think we'll talk about that on in the Tuesday synchronous session. One of my students last semester wrote this about how Wake County Public Library's acquisition system works. I'm going to give you a chance to read that. This is similar to what Marie Harris was talking about in the synchronous class on Tuesday, the 11th. Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Library uses a similar model. A group of selectors working at the central library who buy for all of the branches in their specialty. In colleges and universities, though, like we talked about last time, it's connected. A person is connected with several departments, and those people cater to that department's needs and pay attention to trends in the way information is created in those particular disciplines, etc. And so there's usually somebody who's called a liaison, or sometimes the selector for that department. There's also usually a faculty member who works with the library from the other side. So a faculty member is chosen to be the library liaison from the faculty side. So using those models, how does acquisition get done? And I just wanted to take kind of a case study of this book, the original Black Elite. So we've talked a lot about what evidence we need to select this book, because that's what you've been doing for B2, but let's just review that for a second. Obviously, critical praise from a number of different resources. So what steps did we follow? We assess the needs of your community. Do you work in an institution that would want this book for the users that you have? Is it a good book? We do that from reviews. So last is, how do we get it? Do we get it directly from the publisher? Here's the publisher's page about this book. notice that along the side there's they offer a number of different avenues for you to purchase the book through a book vendor, and Google Play, iBooks, and there was this one, Kobo, that I had never heard of, so um, I went to look at the Kobo record for this book. Different apps and e-readers offered there. And at the bottom of the picture of this book is this information. So this is sales, and you can actually see this in Amazon. It's a little trickier to find in Amazon. Does this information help us make a decision? Well, maybe if you are the biography and memoir selector, it's not very big as a biography, but it's very important to African American studies. So that might help you weigh its importance. So here, again, back to the publisher, these are other retailers. Some of them are audiobooks, vendors, but there's no audiobook yet. I actually Googled and to see if anybody could tell me how long it takes for a Google book to be recorded after it's published, and I couldn't really find that, but I thought this information was interesting. But I also wanted to remind you that there are still around the country in every state a library for the blind and physically handicapped. Um, so all you need to be is sight impaired in some way, and of course a lot of older folks fit that category. And these books are recorded by volunteers, so things happen a lot more quickly. You just have to get connected to this service. So here's the information about the one in North Carolina, which is in Raleigh. So libraries work with people who are called major vendors, um, rather than with these individual book vendors like Kobo or Amazon. But lots of people do, lots of libraries do purchase off of Amazon. It's simple if you've got some kind of credit card system in the institution that you work for. That's a good way to go. But these major book vendors also give you value added for they offer you services. So the big ones are Baker and Taylor, which is now also linked with Follett, and the other big one used to be Yankee Book Peddler, but it's now called Goby, and it's from EBSCO, and then of course Amazon. So what Follett and Goby and Baker Follett, Baker Taylor, and Gobi provide you with is cataloging records. So you don't have to do the cataloging yourself. It comes with cataloging records. You upload them into your system, and you're good to go with cataloging. Some people think that the catalog records that come from these major vendors aren't very good. I'm not a cataloging snob. If you're a small library, then that's fine cataloging in many aspects. Um, Here's the information that says Follett and Baker and Taylor are together. Here's a thing about Gobi, and you can see they have specialized services for like community colleges and medical libraries and things like that. Cataloged and ready to go. Here's our book, The Other Elite. This was a brand new book in February of this year. I just decided to keep an example. So here's the book actually at Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Library. This was the record in January. It's already being checked out. Notice when you search it in the in CMPL, you get both the print book and the ebook listed here. But when you go to other libraries, like Greensboro Public Library, you need to search the ebook separately. And which is what I did. And um, and they couldn't find it. That was again in February. Oops. So the individual library doesn't bear the cost. This is the NC Digital Library. We're going to talk about that more on Tuesday. We're going to talk about consortia and collaboration. So, um, so I created a recommendation. So what is this process called? This is called patron-driven acquisition, or sometimes demand-driven acquisition. So I searched for this book in Greensboro Public Library's electronic books, and I said, I'd really like to have this book. As a patron of Greensboro Public Library, I'd like to have this book and be able to borrow it as an ebook. And so I put in the request, and I still haven't gotten any notice about it, so I don't know if they've ever purchased it or not. I'm going to, I forgot to take a look before the class, doing the class. North Carolina Digital Library has other formats, including audiobooks. They also have some videos. So this is a description from EBSCO about patron-driven acquisition. So what you can do with patron-driven acquisition is you can say, okay, you can automatically order up to a certain spending limit. I mean, this is the absolute trust of your patron, right? But it can be a little scary to do that. So most people, the request goes to a central place, and each request is reviewed. It's kind of like putting in one of those little comment cards in a library. The request is reviewed, and then you're notified if the request goes through. This is also an example of a recommender system, because so I searched for this book, The Other Elite, and these came up. I can kind of understand the Rachel Maddow one, but I didn't get why they were recommending Mama Llama Ding Dong. Sometimes other patrons asking for the thing that I'm asking for is not a good way to make recommendations. Here's UNCG's record for it. I didn't look at the ebook. Okay, so that's kind of a step through the acquisitions process a little bit. Most important parts of what we just went through. There are major vendors. There's lots of different formats. You need to be aware of patron-driven acquisition and how it works. So with journals, I think you've been going through this process of trying to decide what journals or periodicals, what things are you going to purchase on an ongoing basis. And the things that you have to ask yourself, is it durable? Is it included as a full text item in a database that you own or have access to? In other words, do you purchase the database, or is it through a system like NC Live? Should you have a print subscription? What kinds of things would you consider for a print subscription still? Colleague of mine told me yesterday that there are only 30 print subscriptions left in the UNCG library. Many of them are probably the ones that would be either art journals or things where the pictures actually matter. Because pictures are getting better, but they're still not as good as print pictures usually are. You can purchase journals separately, like just put in a subscription request, or you can use a journal vendor. EBSCO used to be one of the largest, but they have gone to more database vendor. They're a large database vendor now, ebook vendor, etc. And there's a smaller place called Cox that will handle the few print subscriptions people still have. But sometimes you also have to e-subscribe, even for some journals that aren't covered by databases. And sometimes they're very small specialty journals. So remember that database access to journals is spotty. Okay, this is the journal A to Z list at UNCG. And here's the New York Times. It's in all of these different databases, but notice only they all cover different years. Here's 1851 to 2008. Here's 1985 to the present. Here's 1980 to the present. Okay, so don't just take for granted that your journal title is covered by a particular database. How is it covered? How deeply is it covered? And be very careful about anything before the mid 1980s. The state of digitization at that time was really terrible. So the way it may be covered is with no pictures whatsoever, only with the HTML text. So, so that's a good thing to remember. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about open educational resources. I just want to talk about these collections of open educational resources. This one's called Merlot. It separates things out by community. Here's the academic discipline communities. Academic support, that would be like tutoring. This is the OER Commons. Notice there's a collection of STEM resources. This is the collections on the OER Commons. Verification is done by experts and things are rated. So this is a way to pre-verify that this is good material by using these collections. Here's the type of thing that's there. Some of them are games, some of them are slide decks. This is a way of cataloging. There are tags here. In library land, we would call this we would call this cataloging, but in the rest of the world, they would call it metadata assignment. Okay, so this has been cataloged. This is AP Environmental Science. Okay, so budgeting. The first thing to remember about budgeting for libraries is that libraries are considered what are called cost centers. In other words, libraries don't make money for the institution. We think they play a very important role, but the institution doesn't see that often. So we have to prove our worth. And in academic library circles right now, we're trying to show how we're important to the learning process. And in school libraries, all academic, the academic world across the board. But if you work for a company or you work for the federal government, you also have to prove what you do. If you work for the EPA library, you need to show that the library helps the scientists do the work that they need to do. Of course, well, we won't talk about the EPA. Personnel is the largest part of any budget. I have been in institutions where personnel were kept and the materials budget was slashed to the bare bones. There's some justification for that, especially now, because service is the main thing that we do. we primarily get materials, we get access to materials, and we need human beings to help us um, provide service to um, connect people with those accessible materials. But sometimes the collection suffers, and it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't have new materials, then people stop coming to your library, and then there's no need for the people, and it kind of snowballs. So there's a balancing act that has to happen, and as librarians, you should be advocating for a good, up-to-date, attractive collection that will bring people through the door. And because especially unique items, that's what endures. So do have a budget. The organization that you work within, almost all libraries serve an organization of some kind. So you need to work with them to make sure that you have the best budget that you can get. Know who's on the city council. Know your local city council person. Know who's on the school board. Know who, where the principal eats her dinner, what church she goes to, what, be active in the community. And because it's that organization that controls your budget. I think some of you probably know that the federal budget doesn't so much fund libraries except for the Library of Congress. Haven't heard anything about the Library of Congress budget. When David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, was speaking to us in April, there had been no inklings of what his budget would be either. Understand the workings of that organization and try to bring on positive change. Not, but think about your organization as a whole, your people, your collections, and the people you serve are a whole. Holistic budgeting there. We used to budget by format. We would have a separate ebook or electronic formats budget. You just can't do that anymore. You need to think about books in categories, and you need to say, am I going to get this as an ebook, or am I going to get it as a print book, or am I going to get it as in both formats? And the patron-driven acquisition era presents another interesting challenge there. There are influences from standards. So there are sometimes, there are definitely standards for particular parts of an academic collection. So if you have a nursing program, the people who accredit the nursing program have standards for how many books you should have, what age of the books they are, how many subscriptions you should have, what databases you should be subscribed to, etc. And in some states, there are per pupil allocations for school libraries that are mandated. I'm pretty sure that North Carolina doesn't do that, and that's a problem. sources come from state allocations, um, of course, local money for public libraries. Um, Lots of libraries have friends groups, and then also endowments. So, what is an endowment? Okay, it's a sum of money that's put on deposit, and each institution has a certain sum of money that has to be there before any money can be spent. Once that threshold is reached, you can actually spend not the money that's in the account, but usually the interest on the account. Sometimes that's a good amount of interest, sometimes it's not. Um, I know that Harvard has over $1 billion in endowments. Some of these are for the library, but um, for various libraries. So I worked for the Cabot Science Library at Harvard. The Cabots were major um, science industry in the Boston area, and we had a very large endowed fund that was controlled by the Cabots. And one of the people from that family used to visit us once a year. It was kind of interesting. So you estimate your budget. You need to look at average costs of materials. What's the average cost of a book in the discipline that you serve? So the average cost of a book in science is about $100, but the average cost of a uh, book in the humanities is about 20. So that's something that you have to bring into your budgeting calculations. And vendors can certainly supply trend lines on this. What's the cost of ebooks versus the cost of paper books? How long is the lease on an ebook? How many people can access the ebook at one time? You want to allocate money depending on the audience, your user population, and cost of materials. And it should be reviewed along with any evaluation program. Okay, so we're going to talk about consortia and collaboration next time. And thanks for listening.